Two Muslim women wake up early one morning and decide to go swimming at the municipal pool of a small town in Valencia. Nothing unusual, just a normal plan. Exercise first, then reward themselves with a good brunch afterwards. They talk about where to go, what to order, laugh a little, it feels like ordinary air. They enter the changing room, still chatting, and get ready as they always do. They put on their burkinis, swimsuits designed to cover the skin, worn by women who choose to wear the hijab. Functional, safe, approved, nothing improvised, nothing illegal. As they change, they notice the looks, curious looks, long looks, the kind of looks that come from people who perhaps have never seen a burkini before. A garment that feels completely normal on surfers, divers, or lifeguards, but somehow becomes strange or unacceptable when worn by a Muslim woman. They try to ignore it, they're used to it. They know that many of these looks are not even intentional, and they don't want to let other people's discomfort ruin their good mood. They enter the pool and start swimming. Just the two of them sharing one lane, calm, focused, moving their bodies, enjoying the water. For 30 minutes, everything feels fine. Then, a voice interrupts. From the lane next to them, a woman starts shouting. At first, the words don't even make sense. The woman looks at each other, confused. Then, the shouting continues, louder, closer. The woman swims towards them and tells them they cannot swim like that it's not acceptable, that it cannot be. And then she says what she really means. She tells them it disgusts her to share the pool with them. She pushes one of the women. Shock freezes them. Anger rises, fear too. They leave the water immediately. One tries to calm the other, who is trembling. They speak to the pool monitor. He listens, tries to reassure them. He tells them they have done nothing wrong. Their burkinis are approved. They are allowed to swim. There is no problem. He also speaks to the aggressor and lets her continue swimming as well. Technically, the situation is resolved, but in reality, nothing is. The woman keeps making comments. The atmosphere is tense. Everyone is watching now. No one says anything. No one intervenes. No one defends them. They are allowed to stay, yes, but under a cloud of anxiety, exposed, isolated, swimming becomes impossible. Because it's hard to focus on breathing when you're being shouted at. It's hard to feel safe when no one steps in. It's hard to enjoy the water when you're reminded again and again that you are tolerated but not protected. They decide to leave. Later, during brunch, the brunch they had been so excited about, the conversation is no longer light. It revolves around what happened, around similar moments in the past, around how exhausting it is to love activities like swimming, sports, public life, and still feel that your presence is constantly questioned. One of them cries, not because of the woman alone, but because of the system around her, because the aggressor is not only the person who shot it or pushed it, but also the silence, the lack of consequences, the complicity of those who allow harm to happen in shared spaces. They feel alone in their own country because they are Muslim, but they are also Spanish. This is their home. And yet they are made to feel that they don't fully belong, that they must constantly justify their existence, their bodies, their clothing, the right to simply swim and then go for brunch like anyone else. And that is what Islamophobia looks like. Not always loud, not always violent, but deeply exhausting and painfully real.
Welcome to Future Chronicles, the European podcast created within a 2-year Erasmus Plus project where young women and allies expose gender disinformation, unpack how it spreads, and share how we can resist it. From the margins to the center, reclaiming our narratives, rebuilding trust, and strengthening democracy.
We are Jove Solides, a non-profit organization with more than 25 years of experience working in Spain. Today, we are recording from Valencia, where we are part of the project Future Chronicles. In this episode, we will address a crucial and often silenced issue: gendered Islamophobia. How discrimination affects Muslim women in specific and intersecting ways. To talk about this, we are joined by a young woman who participates in the project and who is also a Muslim woman herself, as well as an expert on gendered Islamophobia. They are Diyae and Nadia. This conversation brings together lived experience and expert insight to reflect on what it means to be a Muslim woman in today's Spain. Please, Diyae, tell us, in which spaces do you feel most aware of being treated differently because of your faith and gender?
Hello, firstly, I want to thank you for having me here. And well, there are so many places that I can say that I do feel or I felt kind of insecure or scared when I was wearing the hijab, the veil. And now that I don't, I can see that there is, a shift in people's perception of me. Because I remember back at the day when I was wearing the hijab, the veil, people, especially on public transport, they were staring at me directly, prolonged, and that made me so uncomfortable. And also, I remember that when I started wearing the hijab, it was the first year at my uni, and it was kind of, I don't know, I felt like I was wearing an invisibility cloak in reverse. Like everyone saw me, but no one saw me. My classmates had this image of me as being bitter, angry, or antisocial. Like they never tried to get to know me. And I would sit in groups, try to sometimes join conversations, but there was always this barrier, this assumption that I was probably too religious to laugh at their jokes or too strict to be fun. Except a few people, but the majority, they would tend to look at me in ways that made me feel so different. And I remember that the day I took it off, everything changed instantly. Like I remember it clearly. I walked into class with my hair down for the first time, and I overheard a guy say to another one behind my back, "Look, slowly she's adapting," as if my months of wearing it in class were just a phase of stubbornness before finally becoming normal. And then, that same week, classmates who had never spoken to me suddenly started inviting me to coffee, asking me about weekend plans, including me in group chats. It broke my heart, I'm not gonna lie. It made me see that they weren't interested in me. They were interested in the version of me without clothes on my head. They had decided who I was based on stereotypes. The oppressed, boring, angry Muslim girl. And when that image disappeared, they granted me permission to exist in their social world.
Are there places where you feel safer or more accepted?
Yes, I would say that back at the time when I was wearing the hijab, it was in multicultural neighborhoods, in areas with more diversity. There, my hijab wasn't a scandal. And also in very progressive academic spaces, though there is sometimes went too far, they treated me like an oppressed child who needed protection, which was also infantilizing me. But honestly, the only place where I was completely myself was at home, with my family, or at the mosque.
Can you share a time where you experienced discrimination specifically because you are a woman and Muslim or perceived as Muslim?
I have a lot actually. So I do remember in high school, a girl I considered a friend sat me down and told me she couldn't be friends with me anymore because she said I like you, but I can't get too close because you're going to be married off at 16. And she didn't want to get attached to someone who's just going to disappear into some arranged marriage. Um, yeah, and that made me feel a little bit like that she saw me as a character from a movie, not as the girl who sat next to her in math class laughing at the same memes. But that wasn't the only thing growing up. I was constantly policed by my mother's Spanish friends, women who had known me since I was a baby. And every time we would meet at a cafe or at school, they would look at my hair, then at each other, and say things like, promise us you won't get any ideas about wearing that hijab thing, your hair is too pretty to hide. And they started laughing as if it were a compliment or a joke between aunties, but the message was clear. My value was in my visible hair, and wearing hijab would be a waste and shame, a betrayal of my beauty. It was exhausting. These women were basically hoping out loud that I wouldn't exercise my own religious freedom, framing it as a care while actually expressing their discomfort with the idea of me becoming too Muslim or too visible, too different from their daughters. They never asked me what I believed or felt. They just wanted reassurance that I wouldn't embarrass them by going backward. And it made me feel like my body was public property that needed to be kept on display to satisfy their idea of integration.
And how did those moments make you feel? Confused, angry, hurt, or something else?
I would say that I felt betrayed and invisible. Betrayed because she had, my friend at that time, she had never asked, she had just assumed. And invisible because she erased my personality, my ambitions, my entire individuality, and replaced it with a cliche. It made me realize that people weren't seeing me; they were seeing a projection of their own fears and prejudice. I went to the bathroom and cried, and not just because I lost a friend, but because I understood that no matter how Spanish I felt, some people would always see me as a temporary visitor in my own country.
Have you ever witnessed someone else facing gendered Islamophobia? What happened?
I witnessed it constantly during my childhood, especially at the school gates. I grew up watching mothers wearing hijab drop off their kids who were born here, spoke perfect Spanish, played with us in the playground, and seeing how the non-Muslim parents would systematically ignore them. They wouldn't return their greetings, or they would organize birthday parties and forget to invite the Muslim kids. Or invite the children, but make sure the mothers knew they weren't welcome to stay and chat. It was this silent, polite uh, exclusion masked as not having anything in common. And this is exactly why I believe this issue needs to be addressed specifically within educational centers. When children grow up seeing the marginalization of Muslim women, their friends, mothers, standing alone, being whispered about, being treated as invisible, they absorb this as normal. They learn the pattern without realizing it. They replicate the same exclusions in the playground and later as adults, because they haven't seen any other model of interaction. It becomes an unconscious bias passed down simply through observation. And schools needs to actively teach that this polite ignoring is actually discrimination, or the cycle just continues generation after generation. Now, as an adult, I haven't personally witnessed a dramatic physical attack in front of me, like someone being pushed or violently harassed on the metro, in my immediate presence. But what I do experience is the casual, almost routine trauma sharing among friends. We'll be at a cafe and someone will mention almost like an afterthought. Yesterday on the bus, this random guy called me a terrorist and told me to go back to my country. Or another will say, a man spat at my feet and called me a bomber. and the rest of us just nod. Like, it's so normalized, we call it the usual. It's gendered too. The aggressors are almost always men targeting women who are alone. So while I haven't always seen the spark with my own eyes in that specific moment, I constantly hear about the burn.
And do you notice any patterns in the way gendered Islamophobia appears? Are there repeated behaviors, comments, or reactions?
Yes, absolutely. And it's deeply tied to class and origin, what I call the hierarchy of acceptability. There's a brutal double standards in Spain between Muslims of North Africa descent, especially Moroccans who get slurred as Moros, and wealthy Muslims from Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or the UAE. When you're a Moro wearing hijab, you are read as a problem. You are the immigrant, the cleaning lady, the wife of the construction worker, the invasion they fear. Your headscarf symbolizes backwardness, refusal to integrate patriarchal oppression. You are told to go back to your country, even if you were born in Madrid. Your Islam is political, suspicious, and desirable. But when a wealthy Gulf Arab woman walks through Salamanca or Marbella wearing an abaya and designer sunglasses, carrying a Hermes bag, suddenly it's exotic, it's cultural, it's elegant, traditional dress. The same Spaniards who would refuse to sit next to me on the metro will bend over backwards to help her at the luxury counter. Her Islam is sanitized by money. She becomes a tourist, a client, a source of revenue. Her covering is authentic and mysterious, while mine was confrontational. This reveals that the Islamophobia isn't really about religion or even the cloth itself. It's about who they perceive as beneath them socially. The hijab on a poor Moroccan body is a threat to Spanish values. The same hijab on a wealthy Saudi body is just colorful folklore. It creates this horrible tension where some of us try to perform higher class, speaking only Spanish without any hint of accent, dressing impeccably Western underneath, emphasizing that our parents are professionals, just to be granted the same indifference they give the rich Gulf tourist. So the pattern is gendered Islamophobia is classist. It targets working class Muslim women as the enemy within, while exoticizing wealthy Muslim women as harmless curiosities, and both of us are trapped in stereotypes, just different cages.
Does this kind of discrimination affect your everyday life, like going out, attending events, or enjoying hobbies?
Not anymore. Not anymore. Not for me personally, because I don't wear the hijab now. But I can answer this from my mother's perspective, because she still wears it, and to me, she is the ultimate role model in defiance. My mother goes to swimming classes at noon. Yes, wearing a burkini and a swim cap. She takes English and Valenciano classes during the week, sitting among retired Spanish men and women who initially looked at her like she was lost. She rides her bicycle through our town, and several afternoons a week she joins the local retired women for their sewing circle. They bring her pastries, teach her stitches, and despite the age gap and religious difference, they adore her. They love her. She lives fully, refusing to let their discomfort shrink her world. So, when I look at her, I would say this. It depends entirely on your mental fortitude to ignore the barriers. If you have the strength to treat their stares as background noise, to keep showing up to the swimming pool even when they stare at your wet hijab, you can live exactly as you want. The discrimination is real, yes. The exclusion is real. But my mother proves that you can choose to occupy space anyway, to insist on joy anyway, to make your life as big as you want it to be, hijab and all.
Now we are joined by our expert Nadia, who is a sensitization technician and volunteer at Casa Marruecos, an association that actively fights against Islamophobia and works to challenge these racist dynamics.
Thank you for the introduction, Victor. I wouldn't add anything more, it's perfect.
Nadia, could you explain to our listeners what we mean by gendered Islamophobia?
Yeah, of course. Gendered Islamophobia is a form of discrimination where both religion and gender intersect. It's not only about being Muslim, it's about being a Muslim woman. Certain prejudices are intensified because of gender. For example, a woman who wears a hijab is immediately visible as Muslim. That visibility makes her a target of stereotypes, exclusion, or harassment in ways that Muslim men might not experience. In theory, this connects with intersectionality, the idea that different forms of oppression overlap. Here, racism, in the form of Islamophobia, is compounded by sexism. Being hijabi can mean that people see you as Muslim first, woman second, and sometimes treat you as other in both ways.
Thank you, Nadia. That helps us connect the experiences our young participants shared earlier to a wider context. Now, fake news and media narratives also play a big role. How do these influence gendered Islamophobia?
Media narratives are very powerful. Fake news, stereotypes, and selective reporting create a distorted image of Muslim women. For instance, some stories depict Muslim women as oppressed, passive, or hidden. Others focus on fear, linking Muslims to terrorism or extremism. These narratives ignore the diversity and agency of Muslim women, and they reinforce both sexism and racism simultaneously. These representations shape public perception. They influence how people interact with Muslim women in daily life, whether in schools, workplaces, public spaces, or even online. And when someone has internalized these ideas, their behavior can become discriminatory or exclusionary.
That makes a lot of sense. Could you also speak about the emotional and social impact of gendered Islamophobia, please?
Yeah, absolutely. The impact is both emotional and social. Emotionally, women report stress, anxiety, fear, and frustration. Being constantly judged for your religion and your gender can make ordinary activities, like going to school, work, or even swimming in a public pool, exhausting and unsafe. Socially, it can isolate women from public life. They may feel they have to modify their appearance, limit their activities, or constantly be on guard. It affects confidence, belonging, and the sense of being a full participant in society.
Thank you, Nadia. And finally, could you give us a sense of the national context in Spain? How is gendered Islamophobia experienced here compared to other countries?
Yes, we can say that there is something very specific in Spain. There is a form of anti-Moroccan sentiment that shapes how Islamophobia is experienced here. Moroccan Muslims are often seen through a very narrow negative lens, which reinforce stereotypes about Muslims in general. This is different in other countries. For example, in the United States, Islamophobia often focuses on Afghan Muslims. In the United Kingdom, on Pakistani communities. Its context shapes the image of Muslims in the public imagination differently. But the effect is the same. Muslim women face a heightened intersectional form of discrimination. So, while the underlying patterns, fear, stereotyping, exclusion, are common across countries, the targets and narratives change. Understanding this helps explain why certain experience feels so unique to Spain, and why the combination of being Muslim, female, and visible, like wearing a hijab, makes discrimination more likely.
Thank you so much, Nadia. that really help our listeners understand the theory, the emotional impact, and the specific context here in Spain. And it connects directly to what our participants shared earlier about their everyday experiences. At this point in this conversation, it may be helpful to pause. We have heard life experiences. We have listened to expert insight. We have reflected on how gendered Islamophobia shapes everyday life. But these experiences do not emerge in isolation. They are not random. They are shaped and sustained by narratives. Narratives that circulate through headlines, through political speeches, through viral posts, through television debates, through everyday conversations. These stories do not always appear openly hostile. Sometimes they are framed as concern. Sometimes they are presented as cultural debate. Sometimes they sound like neutral observations. And this is precisely how disinformation becomes effective. It does not always shout. It does not always insult. Often it simplifies. It reduces complex identities into single images. It transforms diverse lives into uniform categories. It turns visible markers like the hijab or the burkini into symbols loaded with assumptions. When repetition happens, something subtly changes. An opinion begins to feel like a fact. A stereotype begins to feel like common sense. A narrative becomes part of the background noise of society. And once something feels normal, it becomes harder to question. In the case of gendered Islamophobia, visibility plays a central role. A piece of clothing becomes more than fabric. It becomes interpreted, commented on, debated, judged. The hijab is no longer just a personal choice. It becomes a screen onto which others project meaning. Projection of fear, projection of pity, projection of superiority, projection of control. Media narratives reinforce this dynamic. When Muslim women are portrayed primarily as oppressed, passive, or voiceless, public imagination narrows. When stories focus disproportionately on extremism rather than everyday life, suspicion grows. When coverage lacks nuance, complexity disappears. And when complexity disappears, prejudice finds space to expand. Digital platforms intensify this process. Algorithms are designed to reward engagement. Content that provokes anger, fear, outrage, or moral panic travels further and faster than content that encourages reflection. Emotion spreads more quickly than nuance. Certainty spreads more quickly than doubt. And visual symbols, like religious clothing, are particularly powerful in this environment. A single image can be stripped of a context and transformed into a narrative. Repeated often enough, that narrative begins to define reality. Over time, this repetition creates atmosphere. An atmosphere where certain bodies are questioned. An atmosphere where certain identities are framed as incompatible. An atmosphere where belongings feel conditional rather than guaranteed. This is why the story of a swimming pool is not simply an isolated event. It reflects a broader social climate shaped by accumulated messages. Messages about who belongs, about who is modern, about who is integrated, about who must explain themselves. Gendered Islamophobia is not sustained only through direct confrontation. It is sustained through normalization, through jokes that go unchallenged, through comments that are dismissed as harmless, through institutional neutrality in moments of discrimination, through headlines that prioritize controversy over care. It is also sustained through silence, silence from bystanders, silence from institutions, silence from media outlets that fail to provide balanced representation. When discrimination is framed as misunderstanding, it loses its urgency. When prejudice is framed as debate, it loses its accountability. And when repeated narratives go unquestioned, they become infrastructure. So the challenge is larger than responding to individual incidents. The deeper question becomes, how do we interrupt the stories that make those incidents possible? How do we strengthen media literacy so that simplification is recognized? How do we identify when a narrative is presenting fear as fact? How do we create counter-narratives that reflect complexity instead of stereotypes? Because challenging discrimination requires more than reaction. It requires awareness of how stories operate, how they are constructed, how they are framed, how they are amplified. Once we begin to see these mechanisms, we are no longer passive consumers of information. We become critical observers. And from there, change becomes possible. Understanding narratives is not abstract work. It is practical. It influences how we interpret events, how we treat others, how institutions respond, how societies define belonging. If gendered Islamophobia is reinforced through repetition, then it can also be challenged through repetition, through representation, through visibility that reflects diversity, through voices that speak for themselves. Because stories shape perception, and perception shapes reality. Now that we've discussed the challenges and experiences of gendered Islamophobia, let's move to solutions. How do you cope with these situations in your daily lives? Nadia, maybe you can start.
It's about support networks. I talk with my friends and family when something happens. Sharing experiences helps me feel less alone. Also, I try to remind myself that these moments don't define me.
Yeah, I do something similar. I also prepare mentally before going to spaces where I know I might face discrimination. It doesn't stop it completely, but it helps me feel stronger and in control.
Thank you. Nadia, from your experience, what resources exist for young Muslim women in Spain facing gendered Islamophobia?
There are several types of resources. Associations like Casa Marruecos provide support, advice, and safe spaces. These are very important. There are also online networks where women can share experiences and find guidance. Schools and universities sometimes have anti-discrimination programs, and some municipalities offer workshops or awareness campaigns, but the availability of resources depends a lot on the region, and often young women don't know where to turn.
What kind of support do you think is still missing?
I think that more proactive institutional support is needed. That means clear policies in schools, workplaces, and public spaces to prevent discrimination. Media campaigns should challenge stereotypes rather than reinforce them, for example. Also, education plays a big role. Teaching students about diversity, religion, and gender from a young age can prevent prejudice before it starts. Yeah, I think.
And how do you feel about the support that is missing? What would help you feel safer and more included?
I think having more visible allies in public spaces would help. People who notice discrimination and intervene or show support. Also, clear rules at public spaces like swimming pools or gyms that are enforced fairly.
Yes, and more representation in media. Seeing Muslim women being shown in positive, diverse way would make a difference. It reminds society that we belong, and it reminds us that we are not alone.
Nadia, what should institutions, media, and society do to change these patterns?
Good question, Victor. Institutions need clear anti-discrimination policies with mechanisms to report and act on incidents. Media should avoid stereotypical images and highlight diverse Muslim women. Society as a whole can support inclusion by calling out discrimination when they see it and by recognizing intersectional challenges. Understanding that women who are visible Muslim face compounded discriminations.
And what role does education, youth engagement, and policy play in all of this?
Education is key. Anti-bias and inclusion programs in schools and universities can build awareness from a young age. Youth engagement, giving young people a voice in policing, community projects, or media campaigns empowers them to challenge discriminations. Policies should be intersectional. That means not only focusing on gender or religion separately, but understanding how they overlap. This ensures measures protect those most vulnerable, like hijabi Muslim women.
Thank you, Nadia, and thank you, Diyae, for sharing your strategies and insights. It's important to move from just talking about the problem to thinking about solutions, support, and empowerment.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging the challenges but also focusing on what can be done together to create safer and more inclusive spaces.
Hearing about resources and knowing we are not alone makes a real difference. It gives us strength to keep going.
From the story we shared at the beginning, we can see that this incident at the pool was not an isolated moment. It's part of a larger structural problem, something that has a name: gendered Islamophobia. The experience of being confronted, shouted at, and excluded because of being Muslim and a woman reflects broader patterns that affect many young women across Spain. It's not just about one person acting in a discriminatory way. It's about societal attitudes, biases, and sometimes the lack of intervention from institutions that allow these situations to continue. What we also see from this story is the resilience of Diyae. Despite the challenges, she continued to stand up against racism and Islamophobia in her life. She shared her experience, support other young women, and seek out spaces where they can be safe and empowered. This story reminds us that while discrimination is real and exhausting, it can also spark solidarity and action. The young women involved are not passive victims, they are active participants in building awareness, challenging stereotypes, and helping others navigate similar experiences. In Spain, as we have discussed throughout this podcast, gendered Islamophobia affects Muslim women in many areas of life, from public spaces to schools, workplaces, and leisure activities. But stories like this also show the importance of support networks, community action, and safe spaces that allow young women to continue pursuing their interests, hobbies, and public life. By sharing this narrative, we hope to highlight both the challenges and the strength of young Muslim women today. Even when faced with discrimination, they continue to assert their presence, their rights, and their dignity. And they inspire others to do the same. We have explored how narratives are built. We've seen how repetition normalizes prejudice. So the question now becomes simple. What can we actually do? Because understanding the problem is important, but action is what transforms it. Let's begin with something practical. The first step is learning to recognize the pattern. Gendered disinformation often follows predictable structures. It simplifies complex identities. It generalizes from one example to an entire community. It presents stereotypes as cultural facts, and it frames Muslim women either as victims to be rescued or as threats to be controlled. If a message reduces millions of diverse women into one single story, that is your first warning sign. If a headline provokes strong emotion before offering context, pause. Ask yourself, is this informing me or manipulating me? The second step is slowing down. Disinformation feeds on speed. It relies on immediate reaction, on outrage, on impulsive sharing. But critical thinking begins with delay. Before sharing a post, ask, who created this? What is the source? What is missing? Who benefits from this framing? Sometimes the most powerful action is choosing not to amplify harmful content. Silence, in that case, becomes resistance. But silence is not always the answer, which brings us to the third step, active solidarity. Gendered Islamophobia often persists not because everyone agrees, but because too few intervene. When someone is mocked, when a stereotype is repeated, when a discriminatory comment is framed as a joke. Moments like this shape social norms. Intervention does not always require confrontation. Sometimes it is as simple as saying, that's not accurate. Actually, that's a stereotype. Let's not generalize. Sometimes it means standing next to someone in a tense situation. Sometimes it means reporting discriminatory behavior. Sometimes it means checking in privately and offering support. Solidarity reduces isolation. And isolation is one of the quiet tools of discrimination. Another powerful action is representation. Sharing diverse stories, amplifying Muslim women's voice, supporting media that prioritizes nuance over sensationalism. Because disinformation thrives where complexity is absent, and complexity grows where stories are told from within. Education also plays a role. Conversations in classrooms, workshops in communities, discussions at home. Media literacy is not only about detecting false headlines. It is about understanding how framing works, how languages influences perception, how images shape assumptions. The more aware we become of these mechanisms, the less automatic our reactions are, and the more intentional all responses become. Finally, we must remember that belonging is collective. Inclusive societies are not built by accident. They are built by repeated choices. Choices to question, choices to listen, choices to intervene, choices to share responsibly. Gendered Islamophobia may be reinforced through repeated narratives, but it can also be challenged through repeated awareness, through small, consistent acts of clarity, through refusing simplification, through defending dignity in everyday spaces. Each action may seem small, but narratives change when enough people stop accepting them as inevitable. And that is where transformation begins. As we come to the end of this episode, we want to highlight why this topic matters. Gendered Islamophobia is not just an abstract concept. It affects real lives, real women, every day.
It matters because it shapes the way we move through the world. It affects our safety, our freedom, and the way we are seen by others.
And it matters because it is connected to media and disinformation. False narratives and stereotypes make it harder for people to understand the reality of our lives as Muslim women.
Exactly. Gender, media, and disinformation intersect to create complex forms of discrimination. That's why awareness, education, and critical thinking are so important.
We want to invite everyone listening to reflect on these issues. Question the narrative you see online and in the media. Think about how gender and religion intersect in ways you may not have considered before.
Share this episode with friends, family, or colleagues. Conversation like this can start change.
And don't forget, visit the project website to learn more, find resources, and see how you can get involved.
Every action counts. Raising awareness, supporting affected communities, or advocating for inclusive policies. Together we can make public spaces, schools, and media safer and more respectful for everyone.
Thank you all for listening. We hope this episode encouraged reflection, understanding, and action. See you next time, and remember,
Your voice matters!
You've been listening to the Future Chronicles podcast, an Erasmus Plus project with Synergy Italy, Resident Dreams Sweden, Jova Solida Spain, and Europejski Dialog Slovakia. Journalists for Human Rights, North Macedonia and IVC Romania working together for gender justice across Europe. Futures Chronicles challenges gender disinformation and supports young people in resisting it through education, storytelling, and civic engagement. Future Chronicles is co-founded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. The views and opinions expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. Neither the European Union or EACEA can be held responsible for them. If this episode resonated with you, share it. If you'd like to connect or learn more about the project, please visit future-chronicles.eu or search for us on social media. Thanks for listening.